Welcome to another episode of Social PR Secrets. My name is Lisa Beyer, and I will be your host. Today's guest is Jennifer Orechwa. Jennifer is the COO of Projections, Inc., specializing in employee communications and how to raise employee engagement. We met at PodFest earlier this year. We were both attending the mastermind hosted by Joe Fear and Matt Wolf, co-hosts of Hustle and Flowchart podcast. What I loved about when I met Jennifer is that she talked about how employees can actually influence public relations and how HR also plays a role in influencing the public relations role. Welcome, Jennifer, where we discuss everything from how to use social media and employee advocates to raise the frequency of employee engagement and public relations. Welcome back to another edition of Social PR Secrets. And my special guest today is Jennifer Orechwa, and she is the COO of Projections. Hey, Jennifer, how are you?
I'm doing good.
Good. So we were just talking about this off the air. We met at PodFest this year for the first time. Yeah. And it was right before the pandemic hit, and now we're in this new normal type of situation. We met at the the Hustle and Flowchart Mastermind part of PodFest, which was awesome.
Yes, it sure was.
Yes. So Jennifer, I wanted to have you on because it was so interesting talking to you and meeting you about the whole aspect of employee engagement and being proactive as an employer to have positive employee communications. Mm-hmm. And definitely that is part of public relations, but I think sometimes it's not really thought of when you talk about PR, that employee relations is definitely part of the public relations strategy.
Sure.
So tell us a little bit about Projections and how, in your background and how the two connect.
Yeah. So Projections is a 40-year-old company. We do employee communications. We work with about half of the Fortune 500. We produce videos, websites, and e-learning and social media for companies who want to connect with their employees. So very much in the space of PR, but many human resources folks don't think of it like that. And that is our main audience. So, defining what PR is to a human resources person, that's more employee relations than public relations. So that's how they frame it. And that's how we define it as well.
Yes. Okay. So what exactly is the state of employee communications in this new normal?
So over the course of the pandemic, we've seen our clients communicate a lot more frequently. That's been something that people are hungry for, and they need information more than ever before. So, for instance, those clients that maintain websites with us that are employee facing, we're updating those more frequently. Video addresses that are going out on social media and things like that. We're just seeing a greater volume of communication than we did previously.
Yeah, I would think that it's more challenging than ever for employers and employees to connect and be in sync than prior to the whole work from home, which is really, we're in the new normal, is everybody's working from home, even companies that didn't even think it was possible to work from home.
Right. We've all figured out that it is possible. And communicating with a remote workforce is also another challenge.
Especially in this era. So not only do we have the pandemic, but we're also challenged with like political discussions in the workplace and all kinds of different things that have come up in 2020 that weren't necessarily on the landscape prior. So when you're talking to brands and talking to them about employee communication and employee engagement, like you shared kind of like the different methods, but where do you start? How does a brand, when they come to you, like where are they typically starting, and how do you take on an employer for this type of this service?
So sometimes companies get caught up in the day-to-day of running the business, and they're not thinking about those elements of connecting with employees. So we offer a downloadable guide to what we call the employee engagement journey. It works regardless of the size of the company or the topic at hand. So we begin with that pre-hire awareness stage. So what are you doing to connect before new employees even begin work? Making sure that they understand what your employer brand looks like and who you are as a company. Then as they join the team, are we focusing on orientation, on bringing that new hire into your culture and into your values so that they can help move the company forward? And at that point, we look at the employee entering the honeymoon stage where the energy is high, but it's vital to continue connecting because that honeymoon phase leads into comfort, where everybody's sort of, oh, everything's good. We don't need to do anything to upset the apple cart. This is where, employees often have confidence in their ability to do their job. They have pride in their work. And they can remain in that comfort phase for quite some time. But then invariably, an employee enters into a phase of discomfort where something goes wrong. So this could be a disagreement over work rules or compensation, any number of things. We've seen plenty of disagreements over PPE and taking care of employees in the pandemic. And how a company responds at that point is paramount. Can you address these situations in a way that moves the company forward? So when you're able to bring that discomfort to a resolution through your great communications, that's where the magic of positive employee relations begins. That's the action step that really begins to create employee advocates.
And I'm sure it's difficult for all size companies to really put this in place, but when you're just starting out in a small business, I would think that it's something that is very challenging for smaller businesses. How do smaller businesses that maybe don't even know that your type of company to assist them exists, or maybe they don't have a budget for it? What are some tips that you can give to smaller businesses that might not even think through, for example, an onboarding process for new employees, or having some sort of a calendar for reviews?
There's smaller elements of what I don't know what I would tell them. So I guess in a small business, you could look at a smaller scale, still communicating via the same elements. You can create videos in a DIY sense and make sure that you're doing that on a regular basis. You could create your own social media channel just for employees, perhaps a private Facebook group, and communicate there. So there are ways that small businesses can stay in front of their employees and make sure that they communicate that they are addressing those needs on an ongoing basis, not just running the company, but taking care of the team members as well.
Yeah, that was actually one of the things that we talked about when we were at the mastermind, was how employers can have a Facebook group for their employees to communicate, on more of a social side and a private side. And we also talked about just the concept of, influencer marketing, and how that can be actually, you can have an influencer as an employee advocate inside the company. So what does that look like?
Well, we have seen a number of companies, tap employees as influencers. Wegmans Supermarkets does a fantastic job of it. They operate as though every employee is a family member, and care for them in just that way. Trucking company Sierra England has a private Facebook group just for employees where their team members can serve one another and communicate with one another. So knowing who your employee advocates are and using them as influencers to help build up your employer brand, that's something that can definitely be done on social media as well as even in person.
Yeah, one of the brand that I really think has done a great job is Cisco. They created a LinkedIn page for like a culture page, and
Yep.
Different examples like that. So what are some other brands that are doing it right? Maybe some of your clients, you mentioned one of them, that you can share some of the steps that you've taken with some of your brands that you're working with.
Well, I don't necessarily want to name names, but
Okay.
some of our clients who do a fantastic job, they're just really creative around how they do this, around how they connect with employees, whether that is doing a boot camp to welcome new employees in, or creating creative videos that are memorable, things of that nature that allow them to continue connecting, even in the face of something like a pandemic.
Right. So I thought it was also interesting that we met at PodFest, and so you actually have your own podcast. So how do you use your podcast for projections?
Oh, sure. So Project HR is Projections podcast, and we are actually celebrating our 1-year anniversary next month. So I'm super excited about that. I know. We publish a new episode every week, and our theme is building better workplaces. So our audience is human resources and labor relations professionals. We have a really good time on our podcast. We've interviewed thought leaders, practitioners, authors, labor and employment attorneys. Some of my favorite episodes, we had Doug Buse on, who did a fantastic episode on innovation. We recently had Jeff Novak, who's an employment attorney with Littler Mendelson. He has a blog dedicated to the Family Medical Leave Act, which sounds really dry and boring, but Jeff was highly entertaining. He even sang a song for us. So our podcast is a really good time.
Yeah, well, I just launched Social PR Secrets podcast right after we met at PodFest.
Right, I remember.
And definitely it's a learning curve, and it's just something you have to really be dedicated to. So just speaking of podcasts, what are some tips that you would give if somebody's just starting out with their podcast and what you've learned along the way?
Definitely research and planning. Those are paramount. A lot of people, I think, just sort of jump right in, which there's nothing wrong with that. The whole idea of start ugly, of course. But being able to think it through, make sure you've got your questions ahead of time, make sure you know your guest well, know that you're collectively you need to like look at all of your episodes as what is the purpose of this. I think that's sometimes people lose focus. They're like, I just need guests. So knowing that you've got a theme around your episodes and you're really serving a particular audience, I think is important.
Definitely, definitely. What are some mistakes that you've learned from, if there's been any, that if you had to do it over, you would do it different?
Well, it's funny because each episode kind of has its own unique particular mistakes. So, so for instance, we had a guest on recently, and we had given him the questions in advance. And so rather than waiting for me to ask the questions as the host, he just like started answering everything.
So-
Answer. And so all of the entire podcast is just his answers. There's nothing else in it. So, so things like that you learn along the way, but there's no real way to overcome those mistakes beforehand.
Yeah, I definitely can see that. I was looking at your website, and a lot of it is talking about employee engagement and also how brands can empower teams to become more productive. Can we talk on those 2 points? Because I think no matter what size company, that's always something that is always, we're always learning when it comes to that.
Sure. And employee engagement is really, that's where we hang our hats.
Yeah.
Everything that comes off that, every challenge that any company has starts with employee engagement. If you've got engaged and productive employees, then a lot of the other stuff takes care of itself.
How do you do that? What are some tips on how you can really have that positive employee engagement?
Yeah, and that really begins with excellent communication, and doing that on an ongoing basis, making sure that that's a priority, not just one-way communication, like we're not just talking about handed down from on high, but actually listening to employees. So, for instance, on many of the websites that we do, we have an anonymous employee question form. So they can submit a question and then it's actually answered with full transparency and authenticity right there on the site so that everybody can see the answers to it. So that gives a sense of trust in the company and allows that two-way communication to flow freely.
Yeah, definitely. And what about when it comes to just being productive and team building? What are some tips that you give when it comes to that? And I mean, as an employer, it can be, sometimes you can get disconnected from what is going to help your employees and your teams be productive.
Mm-hmm. We think that productivity comes a lot out of great leadership. So we focus on leadership quite a bit. We have a product called A Better Leader that really brings leaders into alignment. So brings them all to the same topic and lets them focus on that topic for an entire month. So I think that productivity often stems from great leaders throughout the company. So knowing who to promote, knowing how to groom those leaders to carry your message and carry your values while you're still looking for productivity is really important.
Are there trends that are happening right now when it comes to employee communications that, let's say, it wasn't a trend 5 years ago or even 3 years ago because of technology or different things?
There's a lot more focus on e-learning. So we do a lot of interactive e-learning. So that's something that we do for leaders and employees. But again, what we just talked about was that focus on the leaders and making sure that all of your leaders are walking the talk and making sure that you are addressing things like diversity and inclusion and your leaders are well versed in these topics. There's a tendency sometimes with leaders, especially in larger companies, to head down, get the job done, and only focus on that productivity. They're not focusing on their leadership skills or taking care of their employees. So that's been a recent focus in the, especially with everything that's been going on this year, is making sure that you're listening to your employees and that you're addressing their needs. And so I would say leadership training and leaning toward e-learning more than anything else.
And how, when it comes to leadership training, you said you have a product wrapped around that. So how do you know if you're a company that actually needs leadership training? What if you think you do, but you really don't?
Well, most companies do. You'll see the symptoms in employee disengagement. You'll see resistance to change, productivity falling off or not what it used to be. Union organizing is sometimes a symptom. If you are getting government violations like OSHA violations and things like that, your leadership is not supporting who you want to be as a company. So making sure that you're not just doing the hard skills that are needed for the job, but those soft skills like time management and delegating, things like that, focusing on those areas there, those symptoms can be taken care of with better leadership training.
Definitely, definitely. And what are some, if you can maybe share some sources that employers can use to help improve their positive communication and employee engagement? Are there books, or your podcast is definitely a source that
our podcast, sure. Yeah. And then we also have 3 blogs that we publish on. So we have our projections blog, which is on our main website, and that is all HR topics. So there we talk about harassment, avoidance, we talk about diversity, we talk about inclusion, we talk about communicating about your benefits. All of those sort of topics are on projectionsinc.com. Then we also have a website called Union Proof, and that is all about labor relations and making sure that you're taking care of your employees and communicating well to keep them from organizing a union. Then we also have A Better Leader, which is where all our leadership topics are. So that again goes back to what we were just talking about with all of the soft skills and helping inspire your leaders to greatness. So all of those, I would definitely say, I love reading books. I've got lots and lots of books, but those 3 websites right there have a wealth of information.
Speaking of taking care of your employees, so let's talk about on the side of like mental health and wellness. Is that something that employers you feel like are improving on? Is that something that is also employees, I think more valuable than ever if their employee cares about their mental health and wellness?
We have done a little bit on that, but most of what we've been doing is pushing that topic forward. So there are companies, and larger companies mostly, who are able to dedicate resources to that particular area. We have done quite a bit on leadership training, making sure that work-life balance, which doesn't actually exist, but the idea there that you can actually balance what you're doing at work and the time that you need at home, and that's even harder these days. But not a lot of companies have the resources to dedicate to that right now. If they've got an additional time and energy around something, it's going to be towards diversity and inclusion. It's going to be toward taking care of the things that are happening right now in the world that their employees are concerned about.
Yeah. So it's really, is that part of leadership training, is the taking care of yourself and making sure your employees are taken care of too, or that it's not a priority is what you're saying?
Well, no, I think it is a priority for many companies. I think that many of them are handling it more in a one-on-one kind of way. Most of what we do is more of a broadcast kind of idea with, websites and video and things like that. And oftentimes those mental health issues and self-care, those are more of a, educate your leaders so that they can take care of the employees in a one-on-one kind of sense.
When I was researching my book, Digital Detox Secrets, one of the things that I came across was that companies like Facebook and Twitter, the ones that really have caused the digital mental drain, ironically, they're the companies that are investing in things like meditation rooms and resources that are to help their tech employees not get burned out, which I thought was pretty ironic.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of digital detox secrets, so you're an entrepreneur. What are some of the things that you do to, you said digital life balance doesn't really exist, but what do you do to kind of like offset the crunch?
Honestly, I'm focusing energy, not on what is right now, but what could be. So taking care of our team, taking care of myself, reading, getting out of my own head, focusing on what could be, dreaming big and finding ways to pivot into 2021 as opposed to dwelling on where we've been.
Yes, definitely. Definitely. And what are some of your favorite podcasts besides your own?
I actually really love podcasts around business and entrepreneurship. I like Built to Sell. Scale or Fail is another good one. I also enjoy Seeking Wisdom. Drift's David Cancel does a really good job with that one. I like Theory of Content. I don't know if you've seen that one. And then David Miller has Story Brand. I love that one.
Oh, no, I have to check. No,
Yeah.
I have a lot of those I'm not listening to. So I definitely have to.
Good stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And we talked a little bit about also when we met about the influence of public relations when it comes to HR and different ways that HR can embrace public relations in a more proactive way. So I mean, one of the things that I see with them when I'm working with clients is they're upset about, for example, Glassdoor reviews that end up, coming up in search results when somebody's searching their brand or searching their keywords. And one of the things that we recommend to clients is, to make sure that they're monitoring, whether it's reviews from Glassdoor, which would be, kind of an HR thing,
Sure.
or, Yelp or even Google, because employees could, even leave some sort of a review, good or bad, positive or negative, on any review site.
Mm-hmm.
So I just think that that's interesting that, HR really has to wear a bunch of different hats, sometimes even,
Mm-hmm.
marketing and public relations, and also, all these different, the different things that they have to deal with. So what are some other ways that, that you feel like HR could help boost public
Yeah.
relations?
So I mean, the employer brand is a huge part of recruiting the brightest minds and the best talent for any company.
Mhm.
So, positive employee relations throughout the employee engagement journey is the key to what employees might say about the company on something like Glassdoor or Indeed. Moving every employee along that journey means that you're creating employee advocates in the end, and creating that culture where authenticity and transparency are valued. Humility and leadership is practiced. That means that the reviews left on Glassdoor are going to be truly reflective of your employer brand. So that's really HR's goal in terms of PR is not necessarily worrying about the PR itself, but making sure you're taking care of the employees so that they become advocates.
Definitely. And I mean, it's really, the employees can help sell the company and, really represent the culture, which is what I just keep bringing to mind Cisco, and
Mm-hmm.
how they have, they give their employees, like, basically they have their own social media channels that represent the Cisco culture.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think that that's just such a, forward way of thinking when it comes to really, representing your brand, and,
Yeah.
and investing in your employees,
Mm-hmm.
and the difference that they can make in your bottom line, and also attracting new talent. And
Yeah.
speaking of attracting new talent, like, can we talk about that a little bit, and
Sure.
how this really translates into, an automatic, it's like a referral source for new employees.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we do talk a good bit about recruitment on our website and how the engagement of your current employees has that will definitely positively reflect on your recruitment efforts. And that employer brand is what we think of. Being an employer of choice that HR should focus on long term. It's not just can we recruit. You want to retain those employees so that they then give positive reviews and bring in the newest and brightest minds. A lot of the companies that we work with, one of the best things I love to see them doing is what we call a pre-hire orientation. So they create a video with us that is reflective of their culture. This is what to expect when you come here. This is who we are as a company. Often includes testimonials from employees and upper management, so that new recruit, before they even say, "Yep, I'm on board," they understand what they're getting themselves into. And yes, my values fit with this company's values, and that way your retention rates go up with a pre-hire orientation.
Yeah, that's awesome. And what about, I've seen this in a few companies, that they have their own, internal type of podcast for their
Mm-hmm.
employees.
Yeah, we've definitely seen that. That's been one or two of our clients have been on the forefront, the bleeding edge, if you will, of creating podcasts for employees. The challenge there is content, as it is for all of us podcasters. So trying to get the right employees to come on to the podcast if you want them as guests or executives. That's always the challenge. But yes, it's a fantastic concept that not very few companies are in that space at this point. So it's the wide open West, and you can do whatever you want to. I think that a lot of more companies are going to be venturing into that space.
And if an employer is thinking about creating a podcast for as an employee relations type of tool, what are some tips besides, content would be, I think, something that they need to take into consideration, and do a editorial calendar, and making sure that they have their topics in line. But what are some actionable steps that an employer could take when if they wanted to start a podcast for their employees?
Well, the first thing, and we do this with absolutely everything that we do, is, who is your audience? Who are you talking to with this podcast? And then second to that, what's your objective? If you look at this as a body of work, what is your podcast trying to achieve? Are you targeting recruiting? Is this going to go out so that you bring in new people? Are you actually targeting your employees? Is retention your goal? So understanding that right out of the gate, that'll help inform your content and your content calendar, and your guests who you have on. That's probably the biggest piece of advice. The other piece of advice I would give is outsource it. Any company that's trying to do that internally, you're gonna pod flop, and you're gonna end up not broadcasting as often as you wish, and then employees learn not to trust that source, and then it ends up just being an albatross as opposed to a feather in your cap.
Yeah. And how do you keep up with everything?
By everything.
When it comes to best practices with employee communications, are there sources that you read, that you listen to on that topic, or other sources that our listeners could subscribe to besides some of the things that you've already mentioned off of your blog and podcast?
Sure. So at any given time, I'm probably reading 2 or 3 books at once. Right now, I'm working on Traction, which is that focuses on my passion, which is operations. I also really enjoyed The Ride of a Lifetime, which was Bob Iger's autobiography. His story is fascinating. It opens up on the day that Disney opened in Shanghai, and the exact same day the 2-year-old was killed at Disney World. And so his is just an incredible story. It's just fascinating study of business, employee relations, and how he's handled all of that just with grace. This weekend I read The No Rules Rules. Have you seen this book? This is Netflix's Culture.
No. Oh, yeah. I actually,
Yeah.
yes.
It's
Yes.
it's fantastic. I've really enjoyed
Yes.
it. They literally like sunshine all the mistakes and issues that came up along the way as Netflix grew. But so much of what Netflix does as a company really dovetails with how we work at projections. So I found the book really inspirational. So a lot of reading I keep up with. I also keep up on social media and listening to our clients. There's a lot of great insight and ideas that come out of the clients that we work with.
What were some of your favorite takeaways from the Netflix book?
Well, they go into, I mean, obviously the topic, the no rules rules. So they talk about how they did away with vacation time. So they trust all their employees to take vacation. We struggle with that at my company. We're all so enthusiastic about what we're doing. We're so passionate that we like forget to take vacation. It's terrible. So we are working on that. That's one of our goals, to make sure that everybody takes a little time away to recharge. And then they talked about doing away with other policies like travel and expense policies, and they basically boil it down to act in the best interests of the company. So I love that phrase. I like that idea of, employees, empowering employees to make decisions not based on some arbitrary rule, but on, exactly what they think is going to be best, and supports the culture and the growth and moving the company forward.
It sounds a little bit also like the Zappos culture.
Yeah, a little bit, a little bit. This was a little more focused internally than, like if you read The Happiness Advantage, the Zappos story, obviously they're taking care of customers in an extraordinary way. This is how Netflix kind of took care of their employees in an extraordinary way.
Definitely. And that trend with just unlimited vacation that's come up a couple times. I mean, just in general in some of my masterminds when we're trying to decide, what to do. And so that is a struggle. And what suggestions do you give to having that, if you had that as one of your policies?
Well, there's a couple of different schools of thought. Some people panic and they're like, "Oh my goodness, all my employees are going to disappear and take 6 weeks of vacation, and I'm not going to be able to get any work done." So that actually doesn't happen. People that what they've found with studying this idea is that people don't take any more or less vacation than they naturally would. What is important is setting the context for it, making sure that people understand. Well, you can't just take off at if you're in accounting, you cannot take off the first of the year. This is our crunch time, and we're closing out all the books and all that kind of thing. So setting those expectations, I think, are important, and that's the one warning that I would give. But by and large, when we treat our employees like adults, they act like adults, and they're gonna do the right thing.
Yeah, that makes sense. One of the trends I've noticed also is it just seems like there's less, people are spending less time at one employer. They're maybe jumping around, maybe having their own side gig. So how do you, as an employer, you're committing to giving your employees, the best experience possible and creating that culture, but how do you make them, how do you encourage them or get them to actually stay and commit for, X amount of years, or, because it feels like as an employer, you invest into your employees and then they end up taking that investment somewhere else in a short period of time. What is that a trend that you're seeing?
Somewhat. I do enjoy studying that. Most of the larger companies that we work with, that's not really a concern. They do have turnover, but they do want to retain their employees to the best of their ability. I think any company that can support their employees' passions see a lot less of that turnover, and I think it's generational at this point. But if you can support your employees' passions around what they want to do and make that work in the best interest of the company, that's where you're going to find that intersection of passion and productivity. For instance, our podcast producer, she had her own podcast that she was doing on the side, and we were like, why don't you come over and do this one? And she has just taken it and run with it and blossomed. I mean, our podcast is fantastic. So that sort of where you can look for, what is an employee's passions and keep them invested in the company, as well as being able to grow their own knowledge. I think that's key to retention.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, my assistant who helps me with my podcast, she was inspired and started her own podcast. So I thought that was really
Nice.
cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Jennifer, any last bits of advice that you can give our audience on employee engagement and communication and tips that we need to know that we haven't already covered?
Not necessarily. I think that I think all companies need to work toward becoming an employer of choice. Look at internal PR as not just a series of individual events, but rather as that employee journey, starting with new employee onboarding and connecting on day one with new employees, providing creative and consistent ways of connecting with team members, positive employee relations taking place every day, videos, websites, powerful e-learning, social media, all of this throughout the employee life cycle.
Yeah, it reminds me as you're talking of the new funnel that HubSpot kind of came out with, that the funnel is broken and it's been reinvented, and there's not top, middle, and bottom of funnel. That it's really, the funnel is circling your customers, and you're constantly delighting your customers. And so it's the same with your employees. Like there's no top, middle, or bottom. You're always looking to delight your employees and keep your employees delighted and happy.
Agree 100%. And even when they reach that advocate stage where, they're actually, telling their friends what a great place it is to work, even then you can still address their needs and make sure that they're taken care of.
Yes, definitely. Well, if we think of anything else, we're going to definitely subscribe to Project HR, your podcast, and I'll put all of the rest of the links to your social and to your website and some of your favorite podcast episodes in the show notes. But Jennifer, thank you so much for sharing all this wisdom and all of your HR and employee secrets.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on. Yeah.
Yes,
Fun.
Thank you.
All right.
Namaste.
Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Social PR Secrets. If you like what you heard, check out the book on Amazon or follow our blog at socialprsecrets.com. This episode was sponsored by the Buyer Group, a social PR agency striving to keep our balance in the digital world, practicing public relations, social media, and search marketing, while occasionally drinking a glass of wine or two for the best creativity and results. Thank you all for tuning in. If you would like to get a free chapter of Social PR Secrets, go to socialprsecrets.com/free.